The woman came up to me just as I left the stage. As the editor of Inc. magazine, I'd been on a panel in front of an audience of entrepreneurs from my hometown of Cincinnati. I thought the panel went great. People chuckled at my little jokes, and I was even able to summon from a long ago college philosophy course a quote from Hannah Arendt, the famous 20th century political theorist. So I was feeling not just witty and authoritative, but learned. The woman from Cincinnati said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I was all prepared for, how do you know so much about Hannah Arendt? And instead, she asked, why do you journalists always lie? Everyone, if they're lucky, have a moment when they're forced to recognize that the world is bigger than the bubble they live in. And this is one of those moments for me. And I promptly blew it. I got defensive. I told the woman from Cincinnati how ridiculous it was to think that, and of course, that did no good at all. With Midwestern politeness and utter certitude, she let me know that she was on to me and my ilk. You're all liars, and that's that. Have a nice day, though. Truth, let's face it, has had a rough couple of years. According to the Edelman Trust Barometer, a survey of people's trust in institutions, only about 26% of Americans have faith that the media try to get it right most of the time. To put that number in perspective, that's only 8 points more trust than Russians have in their media. And the mistrust isn't limited just to journalism. It applies to just about every institution that aspires to uncover truth. Mainstream science, the Supreme Court, higher education, medicine, all at or near new lows in trust. Now, it's not that these institutions never get things wrong, far from it. But when we, as a society, trust that some institutions sincerely try to find the truth on our behalf, what we get is a shared reality, a common set of facts from which we can make decisions as a nation. When we don't have that grounding, we're at risk of wandering into the kind of information no man's land you find in authoritarian countries. Hannah Arendt, yes, her again, the philosopher from my Cincinnati panel, described this as a state in which the people believe everything is possible and nothing is true. We do not want to go there. Restoring a shared relationship with truth is, in my opinion, the challenge facing our democracy. It may take decades to undo the damage done by social media and polarization and all those other major forces at work. And maybe you are on the front lines of the fight to rehabilitate truth, and if you are, God bless. But if you're not, you can still be an ally. So, what does it even mean to be an ally for truth? Well, I'll give you 3 keys. The first of which is simply to acknowledge that there is such a thing as objective truth. A truth based on facts, not your facts and my facts, not red facts and blue facts, just facts. To paraphrase the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, the great thing about a fact is it's true, even if you don't believe it. So, how do you recognize a fact? Well, that is a question that has entertained philosophers for centuries. We have 18 minutes, so I'll give you the portable TEDx version. A fact is a claim that can, in theory, be disproven, but has, in practice, resisted all efforts at disproof. Stranger Things is the greatest sci-fi series ever created. That is not a fact. It's an opinion, and you can't disprove an opinion. Planet Earth is a sphere, more or less. Well, that can, in theory, be disproven. And to be fair, the Earth does kind of look flat, especially here in Indiana. But NASA has clocked about 1.5 million photos of Earth from space, and it's pretty clear the thing is round. I hope that doesn't come as a surprise. Now, defining a fact as a claim to be disproven is helpful because it underscores that truth is not something some powerful person or institution just gets to decide and then we're done with it. All of us carry biases hardwired into our brains that make us all too easily seduced by untruth. The psychologist Danny Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for cataloging those biases. It's not a question of being dumb or dishonest. We just can't help ourselves. Which brings me to the second key to being an ally for truth. So, yes, you have to be willing to stand up for objective truth, but you also have to be humble about your ability to recognize it and not inadvertently become what Soviet propagandists used to call a useful idiot. Now, what is a useful idiot? Well, Harvard researchers have mapped what they call the misinformation life cycle. In stage 1, a misinformation campaign is seated on a remote corner of the internet, 4chan or Gab or a small social media account. In stage 2, the false claim is amplified by supporters, humans or bots or a combination. And in stage 3, if the campaign is lucky, it is picked up and spread by someone with influence, a popular podcaster, a TikTok influencer. Strictly speaking, that's the useful idiot. But it's more complicated. For example, about a year ago, there was a brief flurry of concern about fires at food processing plants in the US. The story made the leap to the program of a well-known cable TV commentator, but it started on a small social media account where someone aggregated 20 small-town news headlines about fires at local factories making breakfast cereal, among other foods. The implication being, 20 fires? That's way too many to be a coincidence, isn't it? The only possible explanation is that sinister forces are at work to cripple our strategic stockpile of Cap'n Crunch. Well, no, not really. Fact checkers were quick to point out that there are 300,000 food processing plants in the US, and so fires at 20 of them over 6 months is nothing unusual, especially when you consider that in none of those cases did authorities consider the fires to be suspicious. So how did such a flimsy story get such traction? Well, that cable TV host should have known better than to pick up the story, but he didn't work alone. His team would never have heard about the fires had other people not shared that original misleading tweet. When falsehoods go viral, there is usually no shortage of useful idiots. But you don't have to be one. So before you click on that headline, or more important, before you share it, ask yourself, is this claim designed to outrage me, or shock me, or alarm me? Not everyone who spreads that kind of emotional content is lying to you, but everyone who is trying to manipulate you is very likely to try to exploit our all too human inability to look away from that kind of content. Suspicious fires at food plants across the nation. If your antennae are not up, that's a hard headline to resist. Also ask yourself, is this story conforming a little too closely to my favorite worldview? If you believe that people with certain politics are evil, then for a moment, you might be willing to credit the idea that they could be behind a plot to burn down food factories, even though when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. In that case, just slow down before you hit retweet. Odds are your Cap'n Crunch is perfectly safe. Now, That is an easy claim to make fun of, but it isn't always easy to be an ally for truth. It can be especially hard to challenge a claim when doing so puts you at odds with the beliefs of your group. We humans are hardwired for tribal loyalty. Decades of research have shown that to avoid contradicting their group, people will consistently agree with statements that are plainly false. So too with your news feed. Your instincts are always going to tell you, stick with the tribe, stick with the tribe. And yet, to be an ally for truth demands more of you. During the COVID crisis, the public health expert, Dr. Lena Wen, supported conventional safety measures like masking and social distancing. And then about a year ago, after vaccines were widespread, she suggested in a Washington Post column that vaccinated families could again consider public gatherings, going to the gym, going to the restaurants. Not everyone was ready for that, but the facts had changed, and so Dr. Wen rightly and publicly changed her mind. In an instant, she went from being demonized by one side for being too restrictive to being burned on social media by the other side for disloyalty, including by people she had considered friends. That was brutal. Acknowledging nuance and opposing points of view will win you no love from loyalists. And yet, that is the essence of wisdom. And what do you want to be famous for? Really, really good conformity or wisdom? Which brings me to the third key to being an ally for truth. Don't give up. So, yes, polarization and mistrust seem intractable in the US. And yet, research shows that in private, most Americans largely agree on our most important national aspirations. Look at your own experience. Poke your head outside your bubble, and you see neighbors whose politics may be different, but you know that they are not evil or stupid or all the other stereotypes that play on social media. Disbelieving the evidence of your own experience is exhausting, and ultimately, it's unsustainable. For instance, in the lifetime of people in this room, deeply embedded social structures have toppled when people simply stopped supporting the lies that held them up. Poland, Eastern Germany, the Baltic states, the Czech Republic, all became democracies when ordinary people stopped pretending to believe in communism. Jim Crow, apartheid. People struggled to overturn these, but ultimately they collapsed because they were built on foundations of falsehood. You see, truth has one insurmountable advantage. It describes the real world and can make it better. Lies, on the other hand, create nothing but chaos. Lies cannot put a rover on Mars. They can't discover a vaccine. They can't unite us behind a shared reality. So let's go back to the lady from Cincinnati. With the wisdom of hindsight, how do I wish I had reacted? Well, if I had it to do over again this time, I'd listen. I'd try to understand why she was so sure that everyone in my profession is dishonest, and I'd acknowledge the fact behind her belief, which is that we in the media don't always earn the right to trust. But what I would not do is let her claim stand unchallenged. Not to win the argument. I tried that, it didn't work. But I could make a connection. I could share with her the fact of how hard we work at Inc. to get things right. And I could raise a question in her mind and trust that over time, her own experience would lead her to a more nuanced reality. I don't mean to minimize the challenge that we face. It is easier than ever in history to spread mistrust and lies. But you and I don't have to be part of it. we can choose not to play the useful idiot. We can choose not to be manipulated by outrage merchants. We can choose wisdom over loyalty. A witness to authoritarianism, a survivor of the Holocaust, Hannah Arendt knew the corrosive power of lies. But she also knew that they must ultimately fail. However great the tissue of falsehood an experienced liar has to offer, she wrote, it can never be large enough to cover the immensity of factuality. The immensity of factuality. The tissue of falsehood. I know which one I'm going to bet on. How about you? Thank you.